The wagon lurched to a halt outside the trading post, and Vivian Jensen knew her father had finally done what he had threatened for months, sold her like livestock to pay his debts and stock up for the coming winter of 1883. She sat rigid on the wooden bench, her hands clenched in her lap, watching through the canvas opening as her father jumped down and disappeared into the weathered building. The October wind swept across the Nevada desert, carrying dust and the scent of sagebrush through Verde, a town barely clinging to existence along the railroad tracks. At 22 years old, Vivian had survived her mother's death, her father's descent into drink and gambling, and 3 hard years of drought that had turned their small farm into a patch of cracked earth. But this being bartered away like a sack of grain felt like a final, crushing blow. "Get down," her father barked, stumbling back out with a tall man beside him. "This here is Gideon Young. He is taking you off my hands." Vivian's throat tightened as she studied the cowboy who had apparently purchased her future. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders straining against a worn leather vest. His hat shadowed eyes that might have been green or brown in the fading afternoon light. Unlike her father, whose clothes reeked of whiskey and desperation, this man carried himself with quiet purpose. Dust covered his boots and the lower half of his denim trousers, suggesting he had ridden far to reach this God-forsaken place. "Madam," Gideon said, tipping his hat. His voice was low and steady, nothing like the rough bark of the miners and drifters who frequented her father's table. "I know this is not how anyone would choose to meet, but I gave your father enough supplies to see him through winter, and I will see you are treated with respect." "Respect?" Vivian's voice cracked as she climbed down without assistance, refusing to meet either man's gaze. "You traded flour and beans for a human being." Her father spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "You watch your mouth, girl. I raised you and fed you for 22 years. It is past time you earned your keep. Mr. Young here has a ranch that needs tending, and you will do as he says." Gideon's jaw tightened, and Vivian caught something flash across his face, anger perhaps, or disgust. But he said nothing to her father, only turned to her with those unreadable eyes. "Do you have belongings, a bag, in the wagon?" She retrieved it herself, a canvas sack containing 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, back when her father had been a different man. "Then we should go. It is a 3-hour ride to the ranch, and I would rather not travel in full dark." Gideon gestured to 2 horses tied outside the trading post, a sturdy bay gelding and a smaller paint mare. "You can ride." "Yes." It was the first true thing she had said since arriving in Verde. Her mother had taught her to ride before the fevers took her, back when they had owned more than 1 starving mule. Her father was already walking away, heading toward the saloon with his newly acquired supplies loaded on a different wagon. He did not look back, did not say goodbye. Vivian watched him go and felt something inside her crack, and then carefully, deliberately, seal itself shut. If she was going to survive whatever came next, she could not afford the luxury of grief. Gideon helped her tie her bag to the mare's saddle, his hands quick and efficient. "Her name is Daisy. She has an easy gait and will not give you trouble." He swung onto his own horse with practiced grace. "We will stop once to water the horses. If you need to rest before that, say so." They rode out of Verde as the sun began its descent toward the Sierra Nevada peaks in the distance. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, sagebrush and rabbit brush punctuated by the occasional Joshua tree, mountains rising like broken teeth against the sky. Vivian had lived her entire life in Nevada, but always near settlements, near people. Out here, the silence felt vast enough to swallow her whole. "Why?" she finally asked when they had been riding for nearly an hour. Why would you do this? Gideon did not answer right away. He kept his gaze forward, one hand resting easy on his thigh, the other holding the reins loosely. When he spoke, his words came carefully, as if he had been weighing them since they left town. I have a ranch 40 miles from Verde. 200 acres, with good water from a creek that runs year-round. I run cattle and some horses, do well enough to hire 2 hands seasonally. But it is hard country, and it gets harder every year. I am 30 years old, and I do not have anyone to help build something that will last. He paused, and Vivian saw his knuckles tighten on the reins. I was in town looking to hire help when I overheard your father talking at the saloon. He said he had a daughter, strong and capable, and he would trade her to anyone who could provision him through winter. The words struck Vivian like physical blows, but she kept her face impassive. And you thought that sounded like a reasonable arrangement? No. Gideon's response was swift and sharp. I thought it sounded like a man who should not be left in charge of another person's welfare. So I made the trade because the alternative was leaving you with him, or letting some other man, one who might not respect your dignity, make the same deal. Vivian wanted to rage at him, to tell him that his noble intentions meant nothing when the result was the same. But exhaustion was setting in, and the truth was complicated. Her father had become dangerous in his desperation. She had woken more than once to find him staring at her with calculation in his eyes, muttering about debts and opportunities. Perhaps Gideon Young had done her a kindness, even if it came wrapped in the ugliness of being traded like property. "What do you expect from me?" she asked quietly. "You said you need help. What kind of help?" "The kind any ranch needs. Cooking, mending, tending the kitchen garden if you know how. Help with the animals during branding and calving season. Basic doctoring for injuries animals and men both get themselves hurt out here." He glanced at her, and in the fading light she could see his eyes were definitely green, the color of new grass after rain. "I will not force anything on you that you do not freely give. You will have your own room, your own space. If you want to leave come spring, I will take you to Sacramento or Reno, wherever you want to go, and stake you enough money to start fresh. And if I want to leave now, then I will take you back to Verde tonight, though I think you know what waits for you there." His voice was not unkind, but it carried the weight of truth. "I am offering you a chance, Miss Jensen, a partnership if you will have it. The ranch needs work that 2 people can do better than one. In exchange, you will have food, shelter, safety, and wages. I will pay you what I would pay any hired hand, plus extra for the household work." Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. Wages. Her own money. The possibility of leaving in the spring with resources instead of empty hands. It was more than she had dared hope for when her father had dragged her from their failing farm that morning. "Why would you offer me wages when you already paid for me?" Gideon pulled his horse to a stop near a small creek, dismounting to let the animal drink. "Because I paid your father, not you. You did not agree to any of this. The only way this works, the only way I can live with myself, is if you choose to stay and work as my partner, not my property." She climbed down from Daisy, her legs stiff from riding. The mare drank eagerly while Vivian studied the man who had bought her freedom, and now offered her something that looked almost like respect. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, she realized, with a strong jaw and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned, though he had done little of either today. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard and did not shy from difficulty. "I will stay through winter," Vivian said, the words feeling both like a surrender and a small rebellion. "I will work and you will pay me. Come spring, we will see if this partnership is something that can continue." Gideon extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation she took it. His grip was warm and firm, and something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of two people caught in circumstances neither had fully chosen, trying to make the best of bad options. "Fair enough, Miss Jensen. Vivian," she said. "If we are to be partners, you should call me Vivian." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen. "Vivian, and you can call me Gideon or Gid if you prefer. Most people do." They rode the remaining distance in a silence that felt less hostile than before. The ranch appeared as the last light was fading from the sky, a sturdy log cabin with a covered porch, a barn that looked recently repaired, and several corrals where cattle and horses moved like shadows in the dusk. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, and Vivian felt a rush of something that might have been relief or might have been dread. A lean man with gray threading his dark hair emerged from the barn as they approached. "Thought you might not make it back tonight. Got the stew going like you asked." His eyes slid to Vivian with open curiosity but no judgment. "Vivian, this is Hank Miller. He is my foreman and has been working this land with me for 5 years. Hank, this is Vivian Jensen. She will be helping run the household and assisting with the ranch work." Hank tipped his hat. "Madam, welcome to the Young Ranch. It is a good place, and Gid here is a fair man." "Thank you," Vivian managed, though the surreal quality of the day was catching up with her. Hours ago she had been her father's unwanted burden. Now she stood on unfamiliar land, surrounded by strangers, expected to build a life from nothing. Gideon helped her down from Daisy and handed the reins to Hank. "See to the horses. I will show Vivian inside." The cabin was simple but well maintained. The main room held a stone fireplace, a solid wooden table with 4 chairs, and a kitchen area with a cast iron stove that radiated warmth. Shelves lined one wall, holding supplies and a few books. 2 doors led to what Vivian assumed were bedrooms. "That one is yours," Gideon said, pointing to the left. "It is small, but it has a good bed and a trunk for your things. I sleep on the other side. Hank has quarters in the barn, his choice. He prefers it." He moved to the stove, stirring the pot of stew that bubbled there. "You must be hungry. Sit, and I will get you some food." Vivian wanted to protest, to insist that she should be the one serving since that was apparently her role now. But her body was making decisions her mind could not overrule. She sank into one of the chairs, and when Gideon placed a bowl of venison stew and a hunk of bread before her, she ate without speaking, suddenly ravenous. He sat across from her with his own bowl, and they ate in silence broken only by the crackle of the fire. When she had finished, Vivian finally looked up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite name. "There is water for washing in your room and extra blankets in the trunk. We start early here before sunrise usually. But tomorrow you can take the morning to settle in and learn where things are. No sense throwing you into the deep end on your first day." "I am not afraid of hard work," Vivian said, lifting her chin. "I do not imagine you are." Gideon's voice was soft. "But even the strongest people need time to adjust. Give yourself that grace." She did not know what to say to this strange cowboy who had purchased her from her father, but treated her like a person, who spoke of wages and partnership while offering her the space to find her footing. So she simply nodded, collected her bag, and retreated to the small bedroom that was now hers. The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the bed, trunk, and a single chair. But it was clean, and the bed was piled with quilts that looked handmade. A pitcher of water sat on a small table beside a basin, and a piece of real soap, a luxury Vivian had not seen in months. She washed the dust from her face and hands, changed into her nightdress, and crawled under the heavy quilts. Through the thin walls, she could hear Gideon moving around the main room, banking the fire and preparing for the night. She heard the soft thud of his boots being set aside, the creak of his door opening and closing. Then silence. Vivian lay awake in the darkness, her mind racing. She thought of her father, drinking away his supplies in some Verdi saloon, and felt nothing but emptiness where her love for him had once lived. She thought of her mother, dead these 5 years, and wondered what she would say about the path her daughter's life had taken. Mostly, she thought about Gideon Young, about his careful words and the sadness she had glimpsed beneath his steady exterior, about the way he had offered her choices when she had none. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of dreams about endless desert roads and doors she could not quite open. The next weeks unfolded in a rhythm of work and careful navigation. Vivian woke each morning before dawn to find Gideon already up, coffee brewing on the stove. She learned the layout of the ranch, the names of the dozen cattle that would winter close to the barn, the quirks of the chickens that provided eggs. Hank proved to be good company, quiet but kind, with a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable. Gideon kept his word about everything. He paid her wages at the end of the first week, counting out coins with a seriousness that made her throat tight. He never entered her room without knocking, never touched her without cause, never made demands beyond the work they had agreed upon. He was patient when she did not know how to do something, teaching her about animal husbandry and the peculiarities of the Nevada weather with the same calm he brought to everything else. But Vivian also began to notice things about him, small details that accumulated like water wearing at stone. The way he always poured her coffee before his own. How he positioned himself between her and any potential threat, whether it was a spooked horse or a rattlesnake sunning itself near the well. The careful way he spoke to her, as if he was constantly aware of the power imbalance between them and trying to minimize it through sheer force of will. She noticed, too, the loneliness that hung around him like morning mist. He worked from before sunrise until after dark, pushing himself with relentless determination. When he thought no one was watching, his shoulders would sag, and his face would take on a hollow quality that made her chest ache in unexpected ways. One evening in late November, as they sat at the table after supper, Vivian gathered her courage. "Why are you really alone out here, Gideon? A man like you with land and resources, surely you could have found a wife the traditional way." He looked up from the saddle leather he was mending, surprise flickering across his features. They had settled into an easy working relationship, but they rarely spoke of personal things. "I was engaged once," he said after a long moment. 6 years ago. Her name was Catherine, and she was the daughter of a merchant in Reno. Beautiful, educated, everything a man could want. His hand stilled on the leather. But she wanted city life, theaters and society and parties. She thought I would sell the ranch and move east with her. When I told her this land was my life's work, that I could not abandon it, she left, married a banker and moved to San Francisco. "I am sorry," Vivian said quietly. "I was, too, for a long time." Gideon set down his work. "But I realized she was right to leave. We wanted different lives." It would not have worked. He met Vivian's eyes. "After that, I focused on building the ranch, told myself I did not need anyone else. But this land, it is too big for one person. It needs people who love it, who will fight for it. I thought I could do it alone, but I was wrong." "Is that why you took me on? To help you fight for this place?" "Partly. But also because you looked like someone who needed a chance to fight for herself." His voice dropped. "I know what it is like to feel trapped by circumstances, Vivian. To want something different but not see a way to get there. If I could give you that chance, then maybe the trade your father forced was not entirely without purpose." Vivian's throat tightened. "You talk about purpose like you are trying to make up for something, but you did not do anything wrong." "My father did that. I participated in it. I paid money for a person. The words were harsh with self-recrimination. I can justify it all I want, but the truth remains. I can only try to make it right by treating you as you deserve. She stood, moving around the table to where he sat. It was bold, perhaps too bold, but something in her would not let the moment pass. You have treated me with more respect in 6 weeks than my father showed me in years. You have given me work that matters, wages that are mine, and space to breathe. Do not torment yourself over a choice that saved me from something much worse. Gideon looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw a storm of emotions, gratitude and guilt, and something else, something that made her pulse quicken. You are remarkable, you know that. Most people would carry bitterness for what happened to you, but you just keep moving forward. What else can I do? Vivian stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were, how the firelight played across his features. Bitterness is a luxury I cannot afford. I choose to believe that better things are possible. Are they? The question was quiet, almost hopeful. Possible, I think they might be. She returned to her seat, picking up her own mending to give her hands something to do. I think people can make something good out of broken pieces, if they are willing to try. They worked in companionable silence for the rest of the evening, but something had shifted between them. The air felt charged, full of unspoken possibilities. When Vivian finally retired to her room, she lay awake thinking about green eyes and gentle hands, about the way her heart had stuttered when Gideon had looked at her like she was something precious rather than purchased. Winter arrived in earnest in December, bringing cold that bit through even the thickest layers. Vivian learned to break ice on the water troughs each morning, to stack wood high against the cabin walls, to preserve and ration supplies so they would last until spring. The work was endless and exhausting, but she found satisfaction in it, in knowing she was contributing to something real, building toward a future that belonged to her. Christmas came quietly. Gideon rode to Verdi for supplies and returned with a small peppermint stick that he presented to Vivian with almost bashful formality. I know it is not much, but I thought you might like something sweet. She had been kneading bread dough at the table and nearly dropped it in surprise. You did not have to. I wanted to. He set down the burlap sacks of flour and sugar. You have worked harder than anyone could have expected these past months. You have made this place feel like a home instead of just a house. That deserves recognition. Vivian felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had made small changes, curtains for the windows from fabric Gideon had bought without being asked, better organization in the kitchen, even wildflowers on the table when she could find them. She had not realized he noticed, much less valued it. Thank you, she said softly. I have something for you too. It is not much either, but she went to her room and returned with a shirt she had been secretly sewing from fabric scraps. Your work shirt was nearly worn through. I thought you could use a new one. Gideon took the shirt with hands that were not quite steady. He ran his fingers over the careful stitches, the reinforced shoulders and cuffs designed to withstand hard labor. When he looked at her, his expression was unguarded, almost vulnerable. This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in longer than I can remember. It is just a shirt, Vivian said, but her voice caught. No, it is not. He set it down carefully, reverently. It is proof that someone was thinking about me, that I matter to someone beyond what I can provide or do. He took a step closer. Vivian, I need to tell you something. These past months, having you here, it has changed everything. The ranch feels different. I feel different. You have brought light to a place that was growing dark, and the door burst open, letting in a blast of frigid air along with Hank. Gid, we have got a problem. 3 of the cattle broke through the fence and are heading toward the ravine. If they fall in this ice, I am coming. Gideon grabbed his coat and hat, already moving. But he paused at the door, looking back at Vivian with such intensity that she felt it like a physical touch. "We will finish this conversation." Then he was gone, and Vivian was left standing in the warm cabin, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and terror. Because she knew what he had been about to say. Knew it because she felt the same impossible thing, that somewhere between being traded like cattle and finding her footing on this harsh land, she had started to fall in love with Gideon Young. The afternoon stretched into evening as the men worked to retrieve the wayward cattle. Vivian kept stew warm on the stove and paced the cabin, her mind churning. This was not how things were supposed to happen. She was supposed to work through winter, save her wages, and leave in the spring to start fresh somewhere new. She was not supposed to develop feelings for the man who had bought her from her father, no matter how kind he was or how much she had come to respect him. But the heart, she was learning, cared nothing for supposed to best. It was full dark when Gideon and Hank finally returned, both looking exhausted but triumphant. "Got them all back safe," Hank announced. "Though that old heifer nearly took me into the ravine with her. Ornery creature." Vivian dished out stew while the men washed up, acutely aware of Gideon's presence in the small space. He had shed his coat and hat, and his hair was disheveled from the wind. There was a cut on his hand where barbed wire had caught him, and without thinking, she went to him. "Let me see that." She took his hand, examining the wound in the lamplight. It was not deep, but it needed cleaning. "Sit. I will get the medical kit." "It is nothing," Gideon protested, but he sat anyway, watching her with those green eyes as she carefully cleaned and bandaged his hand. "You take care of everyone else," Vivian murmured. "Someone should take care of you." His hand turned in hers, catching her wrist gently. "Vivian, I should let you eat," she said, pulling away before she could do something foolish like lean into his touch or admit that his nearness made her dizzy. "Before it gets cold." Hank was watching them with poorly concealed interest, and Vivian felt her cheeks flame. She busied herself with cleaning up, intensely aware of every sound Gideon made, every glance he sent her way. After they finished eating and Hank had retreated to the barn, Vivian found herself alone with Gideon again. He stood by the fireplace, one hand braced against the mantel, staring into the flames. "What you said before," Vivian began, her voice barely above a whisper. "About me bringing light here. I need you to know this place has been a refuge for me. You have been a refuge. I came here expecting cruelty, or at best indifference. Instead, I found a partner who treats me like I have value, who sees me as more than what I can provide." Gideon turned to face her fully. "Because you are more. You are brilliant and strong and braver than you give yourself credit for. These months with you working beside you, sharing meals, learning who you are, it has been the best time of my life." He crossed to her in 3 long strides. "I know the circumstances that brought you here are complicated. I know you have every right to leave when spring comes. But Vivian, I have to say this. I am in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying. Vivian's heart hammered so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I did not plan this," Gideon continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I did not bring you here expecting or wanting anything beyond good help. But somewhere between teaching you to gentle the horses and watching you hang curtains in the windows, I fell. I fell completely, and I do not know how to unfeel it." "You do not have to unfeel it," Vivian whispered. She reached up, her fingers trembling, and touched his face. The stubble on his jaw was rough against her palm, and the way he leaned into her touch made something in her chest crack open. "Because I love you too. I did not think I could after everything. But Gideon, you have shown me what it means to be truly seen, truly valued. How could I not love you for that?" His arms came around her then, pulling her close, and she went willingly. He was warm and solid, and when he rested his cheek against her hair, she heard him exhale as if releasing a burden he had carried for too long. "I want you to stay," he murmured. "Not as someone working off a debt or fulfilling an obligation, but as my partner in every sense of the word. As my wife, if you will have me." Vivian pulled back just enough to look up at him. "That is the life I am choosing, Gideon. Not because I have no other options now, but because this is where I want to be, with you, building something that matters." He kissed her then, and it was like coming home to a place she had never been before. Gentle but certain, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "We will face every season side by side," Gideon said, his forehead resting against hers. "Spring, summer, fall, winter, whatever comes, we will handle it together. You and me as partners." "As partners," Vivian agreed, "and as husband and wife." They were married in Verdi in late January in a simple ceremony at the small church with Hank and the minister's wife as witnesses. Vivian wore her best dress purchased with her own wages, and Gideon wore the shirt she had made him for Christmas. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Gideon kissed her in front of God and witnesses, Vivian felt the last chains of her past fall away. The ride back to the ranch was cold but clear, the winter sun bright on the snow-dusted landscape. Gideon kept looking over at her as if to confirm she was real, and each time he did, Vivian smiled. "What are you thinking?" she asked as they neared the familiar buildings. "That I am the luckiest man alive." He reached over and took her hand. "That what started as the worst kind of transaction turned into the greatest blessing of my life." "We made it that," Vivian said firmly. "You with your decency and respect, me with my willingness to try. We took something ugly and transformed it." Life settled into a new rhythm after that. The work continued, it never stopped on a ranch, but now it was shared in a deeper way. Vivian moved into Gideon's room and they learned each other's patterns, the small intimacies of married life. He learned that she hummed while cooking and always braided her hair before bed. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes, about losing the ranch or failing to protect what he loved, and that holding him close was the only remedy that worked. Winter gave way to spring, and with the thaw came new challenges and new joys. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and they worked together to reinforce the banks. The cattle had calved, and Vivian discovered she had a gift for the delicate work of tending newborns. Gideon watched her with one of the calves patient and gentle, singing softly as she coaxed it to nurse, and felt his love for her deepen beyond what he had thought possible. One evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set in shades of orange and gold, Gideon brought up something that had been on his mind. "I have been thinking about expanding," he said. "Maybe adding more cattle or diversifying into horses. With two of us working full-time, we could handle more." He glanced at her. "What do you think?" Vivian considered, leaning back in her chair. "I think horses might be wise. There is always a market for good working animals, and we have the grazing land. Plus, I enjoy working with them." She paused. "But I have another thought, too. What about building a proper bunkhouse? You have been relying on seasonal help, but if we had space for them to stay year-round, we could accomplish much more." "That is brilliant," Gideon said slowly. "We could offer better wages, keep skilled workers. Maybe even hire a family. There are always folks looking for steady work and a place to raise children." They talked long into the evening, planning and dreaming. This was what partnership meant, Vivian realized. Not just sharing work, but sharing vision. Building something together that neither could have achieved alone. By summer, those plans were well underway. They hired two experienced ranch hands, brothers named Tom and Samuel, who had worked cattle drives and knew horses. With the extra help, Gideon was able to begin building the bunkhouse while keeping up with the regular work. Vivian expanded the garden, preserving everything she could for the next winter. It was hard work, relentless and demanding. But it was also satisfying in ways Vivian had never experienced before. Each evening, when she and Gideon fell into bed exhausted, they did so knowing they had built something that day, literally or figuratively. They were creating not just a ranch, but a legacy. In July, Vivian realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be certain before saying anything, but when August arrived with no change, she knew. One evening, after the hands had retired to the barn and the dishes were washed, she found Gideon at the table, going over the accounts. "I need to tell you something," she said, her heart racing with nervousness and joy in equal measure. He looked up immediately, catching the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right." She sat down beside him, taking his hand. "Gideon, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." The expression that crossed his face was one of pure wonder. "A baby." "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be. I think it will be born sometime in late winter or early spring." She searched his face. "Are you happy?" "I know we have not talked about children yet, but happy." Gideon pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Vivian, I am overwhelmed, terrified and thrilled and completely in love with you and this child we have made together." He pulled back to look at her. "Are you happy? Do you want this?" "I do," she said, and realized it was completely true. A year ago, she could not have imagined wanting to bring a child into the world. But now, with Gideon, with this life they were building, yes, she wanted it desperately. They told Hank and the other hands the next day, and the men were genuinely pleased. Hank, in particular, seemed touched. "About time this ranch had some young life on it," he said gruffly. "The missus and I never had children, but I always hoped well. I am glad for you both." As Vivian's pregnancy progressed, Gideon became almost comically protective. He insisted she do less of the heavy work, though she protested that she was perfectly capable. He built her a rocking chair for the porch and brought her wildflowers every week. When her back ached or her feet swelled, he rubbed them without complaint, talking softly about the future they would give their child. "They will grow up knowing this land," he said one evening, his hand resting on her growing belly. "Learning to ride and work and appreciate what it means to build something with your own hands. But they will also know love. They will never doubt they are wanted." Tears pricked Vivian's eyes. "You are going to be an incredible father." "I hope so." His voice was quiet. "I want to be better than mine was. He was a hard man, quick to anger. I swore I would never raise my children that way." "You will not," Vivian said with certainty. "You have the gentlest heart of anyone I have ever known." Autumn arrived, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch was thriving, the cattle were fat and healthy. The new horses they had purchased were settling in well, and the bunkhouse was nearly finished. Vivian prepared for the baby's arrival, sewing small clothes and blankets, transforming a corner of their bedroom into a nursery space. In late October, almost exactly a year after she had arrived at the ranch, Vivian stood on the porch watching Gideon work with one of the young horses in the corral. He moved with easy confidence, voice low and soothing as he gentled the animal. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and humiliation of being traded by her father, the uncertainty of those first weeks, the slow unfurling of trust, and eventually love. If someone had told her a year ago that she would be standing here pregnant, married to a man she adored, co-owner of a thriving ranch, she would not have believed them. Yet here she was, and despite everything, she could not bring herself to regret the path that had led to this moment. Gideon looked up and caught her watching. His face broke into that smile she loved, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made her heart flutter. He jogged over to the porch, boots kicking up dust. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" he asked, climbing the steps to stand beside her. "Everything. Nothing." She leaned into him as his arm came around her shoulders. "Mostly how strange and wonderful life can be, how the worst moments can lead to the best ones if we are brave enough to keep going." "You have always been brave," Gideon said. "From that first day when you climbed down from the wagon with your chin up and your eyes fierce, I knew then you were someone extraordinary." "We are extraordinary together," Vivian corrected. She turned to kiss him, soft and sweet. "You and me, facing every season side by side, just like you promised." "Just like I promised," he agreed. "And I promise you many more things, Vivian Young. I promise you will never be alone again, that you will always have a home, a partner, someone who sees you and values you. That our children will grow up surrounded by love. That I will spend every day of the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice in staying." "I know I did," Vivian said. "Because you keep your promises, Gideon. You always have." Winter came early that year, bringing snow by mid-November. Vivian grew large and uncomfortable, but Gideon was endlessly patient, helping her with tasks that had become difficult, keeping the cabin warm and the stove well stocked. The hands checked on them regularly, and Hank's wife, Martha, came to stay for a few weeks, helping Vivian prepare and promising to assist when the baby came. In late February, on a night when the wind howled outside and snow fell thick and fast, Vivian's labor began. Martha took charge immediately, sending Gideon for water and towels while guiding Vivian through the contractions. Gideon was terrified. Vivian could see it in his face every time he looked at her, but he stayed close, letting her grip his hand until his fingers went white. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following day. More than once, Vivian was certain she could not continue, that the pain would break her. But Gideon was there, whispering encouragement, reminding her how strong she was, how much he loved her. "You can do this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You have survived everything life has thrown at you. You can survive this too, and I will be right here. I am not going anywhere." Finally, as the afternoon light was fading, a sharp cry split the air. Martha worked quickly, and then she was placing a squirming, red-faced infant in Vivian's arms. "A boy," she announced with satisfaction. "A strong, healthy boy." Vivian looked down at her son, overwhelmed by a rush of love so powerful it stole her breath. He had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn green like his father's. His tiny fists waved in the air, and when she touched his cheek, he turned toward her instinctively. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Gideon sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Vivian, his eyes fixed on his son with an expression of absolute awe. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "You are perfect. Thank you, Vivian. Thank you for this gift." They named him James, after Vivian's mother's father, a good man who had shown her kindness in her childhood. James Gideon Young, born in the heart of winter but destined, they hoped, for springs and summers filled with joy. The following weeks were exhausting in an entirely new way. Vivian was recovering from the birth while learning to care for an infant who seemed to need constant attention. Gideon did everything he could to help, walking the floor with James when he cried, changing soiled cloths without complaint, bringing Vivian meals when she was too tired to leave the bed. "I do not know how women do this alone," Vivian said one night, fighting tears of exhaustion. James had been crying for hours and nothing seemed to soothe him. "You are not alone," Gideon reminded her gently. He took the baby, rocking him with practiced ease. "We are partners, remember." That means everything the good and the hard. Let me take him for a while. You sleep." Vivian wanted to protest, but her body was already surrendering to exhaustion. She fell asleep to the sound of Gideon's low voice singing a lullaby. And when she woke hours later, it was to find both her husband and son sleeping in the rocking chair, James nestled safely against his father's chest. The sight made her heart ache with love. This was her family. This strange, beautiful family that had been born from ugliness but had grown into something precious. Spring arrived slowly that year, but when it came, it brought renewal in every sense. The snow melted, revealing new grass. The cattle that had survived winter emerged lean but healthy. And James began to thrive, growing plump and alert, his eyes definitely settling into his father's green. On a mild day in April, Vivian bundled James up and carried him outside for the first time. She wanted him to see the ranch in daylight, to feel the sun on his face and the wind that blew constant across the Nevada landscape. Gideon met them in the yard, leaving off his work to walk with them. They went to the creek, which was running high and clear with snowmelt, and stood on the bank watching the water rush past. "This is your home, James," Gideon said softly, one hand on his son's downy head. "This land, these mountains, this sky. Your mother and I have built something here, and someday it will be yours. But more important than the land is the love we have for each other and for you. That is the true legacy we want to leave you." Vivian looked at her husband, at the man who had taken a chance on a woman being traded like cattle, and had seen past the circumstances to the person beneath, who had offered partnership when he could have demanded servitude, who had loved her into wholeness and given her a future she had never dared to imagine. "I love you," she said simply, "for everything you are, everything you have given me. I love you more than words can express." Gideon's eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you too. You and James, you are my whole world. Everything else is just details." They stood there for a long time, the three of them, listening to the rush of water and the call of birds returning north. It was a moment of perfect peace, of completeness, and Vivian held it in her heart like a treasure. The years that followed were full of hard work and deep satisfaction. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more horses, breeding quality stock that became sought after throughout the territory. Hank stayed on as foreman, eventually bringing his nephew to learn the trade. The bunkhouse housed a rotating crew of reliable hands, and the young ranch became known as a good place to work. James grew into a sturdy, curious toddler, then a bright boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the land and the animals with the same patient attention Gideon brought to everything. When he was 3, Vivian gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's smile. 2 years later, another son arrived, Matthew, loud and boisterous from the moment of his birth. The cabin was expanded to accommodate the growing family. Gideon added 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor where Vivian could entertain the few neighbors who lived within visiting distance. It was never fancy, but it was comfortable and full of laughter, which was all either of them wanted. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch was settled for the night, Vivian and Gideon would sit on the porch they had expanded over the years, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nevada sky. "You ever think about that day?" Vivian asked once, when James was 5 and Elizabeth 2. "The day my father traded me for winter supplies." "Sometimes," Gideon admitted, "though I try not to dwell on it. The circumstances were wrong, but the result you here with me, that is the best thing that ever happened to me." "I think about it more than I should," Vivian confessed. "Not with anger anymore, though there was plenty of that in the beginning, but with wonder, I suppose. that something so dehumanizing could lead to a life full of purpose and love and children who will never doubt their worth. "You made that happen," Gideon said firmly. "Your strength, your willingness to take a chance on me on this place. You could have left in the spring like I offered, but you stayed and built this life with me, because you gave me a reason to stay." Vivian took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "You showed me what partnership really means, that it is not about ownership or control, but about two people choosing each other every day and working together towards something bigger than themselves." "We will face every season side by side," Gideon said, echoing the promise he had made so many years ago. "That was never just words, Vivian. It was a vow, one I have kept and will continue to keep until my last breath." "As will I," Vivian promised. She leaned her head on his shoulder, content in the gathering darkness. "Whatever comes, drought or plenty, sickness or health, joy or sorrow, we will face it together." When James was 7, he asked about how his parents had met. Vivian and Gideon exchanged glances, having known this question would come eventually. They decided to tell him the truth, or at least a version of it appropriate for a child. "I was in a difficult situation," Vivian explained, "and your father helped me. He gave me a place to work and live, and over time we became friends and then we fell in love." "Was it like in the stories?" James asked. "Where the knight rescues the princess?" "Not exactly," Gideon said carefully. "Your mother did not need rescuing. She is one of the strongest people I have ever known. But sometimes people help each other find their way, and that is what we did. We helped each other become who we were meant to be." James seemed satisfied with this answer, and as he grew older and the full truth became clear to him, he never thought less of either of his parents. Instead, he was proud of the way they had transformed a difficult beginning into something beautiful. The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. James proved to have his father's gift with animals and his mother's head for business. Elizabeth was quieter, more bookish, but she loved the land fiercely and could outride most men by the time she was 12. Matthew was the adventurer, always pushing boundaries, but his heart was good and he worked as hard as his siblings. Vivian and Gideon faced their share of difficulties over the years. There were dry seasons that tested their resources, winters harsh enough to kill livestock, injuries and illnesses that frightened them badly. Once, when Elizabeth was 10, she fell from a horse and broke her arm. Vivian held her daughter while Gideon rode for the doctor, her heart in her throat, terrified of losing this precious child. But they weathered every storm together, just as they had promised. They leaned on each other in hard times and celebrated together in good ones. Their partnership, forged in such unusual circumstances, proved to be unbreakable. When James turned 18 and announced he wanted to start his own ranch on a section of land to the north, Vivian felt the bittersweet pang of watching a child become a man. But she was also proud, knowing they had raised him to be independent and capable. "You have taught me everything I know," James said the night before he left. "About land and animals, about hard work and integrity, but most important, you taught me what a real partnership looks like. When I find someone to share my life with, I want what you and Ma have." Gideon embraced his son, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Then you will have everything that matters. I am proud of you, James. Your mother and I both are." Elizabeth chose a different path, marrying a teacher and moving to Reno where she could pursue her love of books and learning. She visited often, bringing grandchildren who delighted in the ranch and their grandparents' stories. Matthew stayed on the home ranch, eventually taking over much of the daily operations as Gideon and Vivian grew older. The years turned, as they always do. Vivian's hair silvered and lines appeared at the corners of her eyes, laugh lines. Gideon called them, earned through years of joy. Gideon's hands grew more gnarled with arthritis, though he never complained. They moved slower but still worked every day, unwilling to fully retire while their bodies allowed them to contribute. On a spring morning in 1910, 27 years after Vivian had first arrived at the ranch, she and Gideon walked down to the creek together. It was something they tried to do weekly, a moment of peace away from the constant activity of the ranch. The water rushed past just as it always had, constant and unchanging while everything around it transformed. 27 years, Vivian mused. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. The best 27 years of my life, Gideon said. He moved slower now, but his eyes were still the same green that had captivated her all those years ago. Do you have any regrets, Vivian, about staying, about the life we have built? Not a single one, she said without hesitation. Well, perhaps one I regret that I let my father's actions hurt me as much as they did. But even that pain led me here to you, to this life. So maybe it is not truly a regret after all. You have been the great blessing of my existence, Gideon said, taking her hand. His grip was not as strong as it once was, but it was just as sure. Every day with you has been a gift, watching you become a mother, a grandmother, a true partner in every sense. I could not have asked for more. We did it, Vivian said softly. We took something broken and built something whole. We faced every season, just like you promised. Side by side, Gideon agreed. Always side by side. They stood by the creek for a long while, holding hands, watching the water flow past on its eternal journey. They had weathered spring floods and summer droughts, autumn harvests and winter storms. They had raised children and built a legacy. They had loved each other through easy times and hard, through moments of joy and moments of sorrow. And through it all, they had kept their promise to each other to be partners, equals, two people choosing to face whatever came together. As they finally turned to walk back to the ranch house, where Matthew and his wife were preparing lunch and the grandchildren were playing in the yard, Vivian felt profound gratitude wash over her. She had started as a woman traded for winter supplies, with no value beyond what she could provide. But Gideon had seen her differently. He had offered her partnership, respect, and eventually love. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, not just a prosperous ranch, but a family built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Their children and grandchildren would carry that legacy forward, learning by example what it meant to truly commit to another person, to work together toward common goals, to love without reservation. "What are you smiling about?" Gideon asked, noticing the expression on her face. "Everything," Vivian said. "Absolutely everything." They walked back to the house hand in hand. Their steps matched from long practice, moving together as they always had, as partners, as equals, as two people who had promised to face every season side by side, and had kept that promise every single day. The evening sun cast long shadows across the Nevada landscape as the family gathered for dinner. Around the expanded table sat Matthew and his wife Sarah, their 3 children ranging from ages 5 to 12, and James, who had ridden over from his ranch with his new bride Claire. Elizabeth would arrive tomorrow with her family, making the house full to bursting the way Vivian loved it. As they passed plates of roasted chicken and vegetables from the garden, as the children chattered and the adults laughed, Vivian caught Gideon's eye across the table. He smiled at her, that same smile that still made her heart skip, and she smiled back, a whole conversation passing between them without words. This was what they had built. This laughter, this abundance, this love that seemed to multiply rather than divide. And it had all started with a choice, Gideon's choice to offer partnership instead of ownership, and Vivian's choice to stay and build something remarkable from broken beginnings. After dinner, when the dishes were washed and the children were settling down for the night, Vivian and Gideon retreated to their bedroom. It was a comfortable space, worn in the way of places that have been truly lived in. The quilt on the bed was one Vivian had made years ago, incorporating fabric from significant moments in their life together. The dresser held small treasures: a smooth stone from the creek, a dried flower from their wedding, photographs of their children at various ages. Gideon sat on the edge of the bed, removing his boots with a grunt. "Getting old is not for the faint of heart," he said with wry humor. "We are not old," Vivian protested, though she was rubbing her own aching knees. "We are seasoned. Is that what we are calling it?" He laughed, that deep rumble she had always loved. "Come here, you." She went to him, letting him pull her down beside him on the bed. They lay back together, shoulders touching, staring up at the ceiling the way they had done countless times over the years. "Tell me a secret," Gideon said suddenly. "A secret?" Vivian turned her head to look at him. "After 27 years, what secrets could I possibly have left? Something I do not know, something you have never told me." Vivian thought for a moment. "All right. That first night I spent here, after you brought me from Verdi, I lay awake terrified, certain you would eventually show your true colors and I would be trapped. But when morning came and you had coffee ready and spoke to me with respect, I started to hope. Just a tiny bit. That maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. "I was terrified, too," he admitted. "Afraid I had made a terrible mistake, that I would not know how to make things right. I had never been so aware of my own capacity to cause harm simply by being careless with power. It kept me awake for weeks, that responsibility." "But you never were careless," Vivian said softly. "You were careful with me, with my dignity, with my heart. You gave me space to heal and grow, and when I was ready, you loved me so completely that I forgot what it felt like to doubt my own worth." "You made that easy," Gideon said. "You are remarkable, Vivian Young. You always have been." They lay together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the house settling around them, Matthew and Sarah murmuring in the next room, the children's soft breathing, the wind outside that never really stopped in Nevada. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life well lived. "Do you remember what you said to me that Christmas?" Gideon asked. "About making something good from broken pieces." "I remember. You were right. We did that. We took a situation that should have destroyed us both and transformed it into something extraordinary." He turned on his side to face her. "Thank you for seeing the potential in me, in us. Thank you for staying." "Thank you for giving me a reason to," Vivian replied. She touched his face, tracing the familiar lines and angles. "For keeping every promise you ever made. For being my partner in the truest sense." He kissed her then, and it was sweet and comfortable and full of the deep affection that came from decades of choosing each other. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren arrived and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch prospered under Matthew's management, expanding into horse breeding that became renowned throughout the territory. James's ranch flourished, too, and he credited his success to the lessons his parents had taught him. Elizabeth became a teacher like her husband, but she never lost her love for the land and visited as often as she could. Gideon and Vivian grew older gracefully, their love deepening rather than diminishing with time. They became fixtures in the community, respected for their fairness and generosity. More than one young person came to them for advice about marriage or business, drawn by the obvious strength of their partnership. "What is the secret?" a young bride once asked Vivian. "To making a marriage last and stay happy," Vivian had thought carefully before answering. "There is no single secret, but if I had to choose one thing, I would say it is this: see your spouse as a full person, with their own dreams and struggles and worth. Not as an extension of yourself or a means to an end, but as a complete individual who deserves respect and consideration. When you truly see each other that way, everything else follows." As Vivian entered her 70s, her health began to decline. Nothing dramatic at first, just a gradual slowing, more frequent aches, days when getting out of bed was a challenge. Gideon never left her side, bringing her meals when she could not make it to the table, reading to her from the books she loved, sitting with her for hours just holding her hand. "You do not have to stay with me constantly," Vivian protested one afternoon. "There is work to be done." "The work will keep," Gideon said firmly. "Matthew has everything under control. My place is here with you. We promise to face every season side by side, remember? That includes this one." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "I am not ready to leave you." "Then do not," he said, though his voice shook. "Stay with me as long as you can. But when the time comes, do not fight it out of worry for me. I will be all right. Sad, yes. Lost for a while, probably. But all right, because you taught me how to be strong." "You were always strong," Vivian whispered. "From the very beginning." But Vivian was not ready to give up yet. She rallied, regaining some strength, and for several more years they continued their life together. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. They watched great-grandchildren take their first steps and heard them speak their first words. They sat on the porch on summer evenings and by the fire on winter nights, always together, always finding something new to say or comfortable silence to share. When Gideon himself fell ill in his 78th year, Vivian became his devoted nurse. She who had once been traded like cattle now tended the man who had given her everything with fierce determination. She prepared his favorite foods, changed his bedding, advocated with the doctor, and never once complained about the burden. "This is not how I wanted it to be," Gideon said weakly one day. "Me being a burden to you." "You are not a burden," Vivian said sharply. "You are my husband, my partner, the love of my life. Caring for you is not a burden, it is a privilege. Just as you cared for me when I needed it, I care for you now. That is what partnership means." Gideon recovered, though he never quite regained his former strength. They adjusted, moving more slowly, doing less physical work, but their connection remained as strong as ever. The ranch continued around them, run now primarily by Matthew and his sons, but Gideon and Vivian were still consulted on major decisions, their experience and wisdom valued. On a warm spring afternoon in 1925, 42 years after Vivian had first arrived at the ranch, she and Gideon sat on the porch in their rocking chairs. They were both in their 80s now, bodies worn from decades of hard work, but spirits still bright. The ranch spread before them, green and prosperous, full of life and activity. "You see that?" Vivian pointed to where one of their great-grandsons was learning to rope a fence post under his father's patient instruction. "That is our legacy. Not just the land or the buildings, but the way they are teaching him with patience and respect, just like you taught our children." "It is a good legacy," Gideon agreed. His voice was thinner now, but still warm. "One worth all the hard seasons. We face them all," Vivian said softly. "Every single one, just like you promised." "Side by side," Gideon added. He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the automatic ease of a gesture performed thousands of times. Always side by side. They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent, painting the Nevada sky in shades of pink and gold. Around them, the ranch hummed with life horses whinnying in the corrals, cattle lowing in the distance, children's laughter carrying on the wind. It was a beautiful moment, perfect in its simplicity. "I love you," Vivian said, as she had said countless times over the decades, but it never got old, never lost its meaning. "Thank you for everything, for seeing me, for valuing me, for loving me so completely." "I love you too," Gideon replied. "You made my life meaningful. You turned a house into a home and a man into a husband. You gave me purpose beyond just survival. I could never thank you enough for that." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, their hands remained clasped. Two people who had promised to face every season together and had kept that promise through 4 decades of joy and sorrow, abundance and scarcity, health and illness. They had built something remarkable from the most unpromising beginnings, proving that love could indeed grow from the most unlikely soil. The ranch they had built together would continue long after they were gone, passed down through generations who would learn the values they had embodied: hard work, respect, partnership, and love. Their story would become family legend, told to children and grandchildren as an example of how to build a life that mattered. But in that moment, as they sat together watching night fall over the land they had worked and loved for so many years, Vivian and Gideon were not thinking about legacy or lessons. They were simply together, as they had been for 42 years, as they would be for whatever time remained, partners in every sense of the word, facing their final season with the same courage and love that had carried them through all the others. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.